You're living a lie right now. Yes, you. The person who looked in the mirror this morning, who put on headphones on the way to work, who smiled at friends. All of it, a performance. But where's the real you? Three voices are fighting inside you right now. One says, do what you want. Another says, don't, you'll be ruined. And the third is trying to make peace between them. That third voice is your ego. And you're not even aware, but in every decision, every word, every breath you take, it's speaking. This concept Freud discovered 100 years ago is active every time you look at your phone today. Are you ready? Because we're about to drop your mask.
According to Freud, the human mind is like a three-story building. At the bottom is the id, the dark basement. All primitive. According to Freud, the human mind is like a three-story building. At the bottom is the id, the dark basement. All primitive drives live there. Hunger, rage, sexuality, aggression. The id recognizes no rules. It just says, I want it now. Remember that moment you wanted to yell in your boss's face? That was your id speaking. But you didn't yell, did you? That's when our second floor kicks in, the superego. Society's voice, what your parents taught you, moral rules. The superego constantly whispers, don't, it would be wrong. So how do you stay standing between these two opposing forces? This is where the ego comes in. The ego is the middle floor, listening to both id and superego, but never fully obeying either. It's a structure that connects with reality, keeps you alive, but is never truly you. Think about it. How do you talk in a job interview? How do you act on a first date? How are you when alone with family? All different. Because the ego puts on masks depending on the situation. Freud called this the reality principle. The ego can delay the id's desires, bend the superego's rules. But why does it do this? Because it has to survive. You know this already. Ever felt like you contradicted yourself? That was the moment ego and id were clashing. Maybe you didn't win that battle. The ego isn't your friend or enemy. It's your negotiator, your diplomat in the war between desire and duty. And every single day, it's making deals you never agreed to. It's trading your authenticity for acceptance, your truth for safety. The question isn't whether you have an ego. The question is, who's really in control? You wake up. Before you even open your eyes fully, your ego is already awake. It's scanning the day ahead, calculating risks, preparing masks. You stumble to the bathroom, look in the mirror. Who's looking back? Not you. It's the version of you that your ego has approved for today. Maybe you see someone confident, maybe someone tired. But here's the twist. That reflection is already filtered through ego's lens. Think about what happens next. You check your phone. 37 notifications. Your id wants to ignore them all and go back to sleep. Your superego says you should respond immediately, be responsible. Your ego, it compromises. You'll check the important ones, ignore the rest, and feel slightly guilty about both choices. This is ego in action, and it's not even 8 a.m. yet. Now you're getting dressed. Why did you choose that shirt? Because you like it? Maybe, but more likely because your ego calculated who you'll see today, what impression you need to make, what version of yourself you need to project. That's not vanity, that's survival. Your ego knows that in the modern world, how you appear matters as much as who you are, perhaps even more. Watch what happens when you look in that mirror one more time before leaving. You adjust your hair, check your teeth, maybe practice a smile. Who are you preparing for? Everyone else. Your ego is the stage director, and you're the actor who forgot they're performing. The scary part? You do this every single morning and call it getting ready. But really, you're putting on armor. You're building a fortress between your true self and the world. Freud would see this morning routine and nod knowingly. He'd say your ego is doing exactly what it evolved to do, protect you from both your own desires and society's judgments. But at what cost? When was the last time you looked in a mirror and saw yourself without ego's filter?
You walk into your office. Instantly, something shifts. Your shoulders straighten, your voice changes pitch, even your walk becomes different. This isn't conscious. Your ego has switched masks so smoothly you didn't even notice. Welcome to ego's greatest performance venue, the workplace. Your boss walks by.
Good morning, you say, with enthusiasm you don't feel. Your id wants to ignore him, maybe even say something honest about yesterday's meeting. Your superego demands respect and politeness. Your ego? It delivers the perfect middle ground, fake enthusiasm that's just believable enough. You hate how natural this feels now. Here's where it gets interesting. A colleague asks your opinion on a project. You think it's terrible, genuinely awful. But watch what comes out of your mouth. It's interesting. Maybe we could explore some alternatives. Your ego just translated "this is garbage" into corporate diplomacy. It happened in milliseconds. You didn't decide to lie. Your ego decided for you that truth was too dangerous here. Lunchtime arrives. You sit with coworkers, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, nodding at opinions you disagree with, pretending to care about topics that bore you. Is this fake? No, it's ego doing its job. Because if you showed up as your raw, unfiltered self, you'd be fired by Tuesday. Society doesn't want authenticity. It wants predictability. Your ego knows this. But notice what happens at 5 p.m. The moment you leave that building, your shoulders drop. Your face relaxes. You might even sigh. That's not relief from work. That's relief from performance. Your ego just clocked out from its hardest shift. The mask is loosening, but it's not off yet, because you're heading home where another performance awaits. Freud understood this completely. He knew the workplace demands ego strength. The stronger your ego, the better you perform socially. But he also knew something darker. The stronger your ego becomes at performing, the further you drift from who you actually are underneath all those masks. You open Instagram. Within 3 seconds, your ego is in overdrive. Every photo you see triggers it. Someone's vacation looks better than yours. Your id feels jealous, wants to criticize. Your superego feels guilty for being jealous. Your ego? It double taps the photo and comments "amazing" with 3 emojis. Problem solved. Feelings buried, performance maintained. Now you're scrolling through your own feed. Look at those photos. Are they really you? That perfectly angled selfie took 17 attempts. That spontaneous beach photo was carefully staged. That inspirational quote you posted? You don't even follow that advice yourself. But your ego curated all of it, because on social media, ego doesn't just wear a mask. It builds an entire alternative reality. Here's the terrifying part. You start believing your own performance. You post about productivity while procrastinating. You share fitness content while eating junk food. You write about mental health while ignoring your own anxiety. Your ego has created a version of you that exists only in pixels, and somehow that digital ghost feels more real than the person sitting in your room right now. Think about what happens when you post something. You hit share, then what? You refresh, check the likes, read the comments. Your heart rate actually changes based on digital validation from people you barely know. Why? Because your ego has tied your self-worth to this performance. Every like is applause. Every comment is confirmation that your mask is working. Every share means your ego successfully fooled someone else. But Freud would ask you something uncomfortable. Who are you when nobody's watching? When there's no camera, no audience, no notifications? Can you even remember? Your ego has been performing for so long on social media that the real you might have forgotten how to exist without an audience. You've become your own spectator, watching your life through ego's lens instead of living it. The algorithm knows your ego better than you do. It feeds you content that triggers it, keeps it engaged, makes it perform more. You're not scrolling mindlessly. Your ego is working overtime, comparing, judging, performing, protecting. And you call this relaxing? You're on a date. First one. Across the table sits someone you barely know. And yet your ego is already writing fiction. It's crafting the perfect version of you. Funny, but not trying too hard. Confident, but not arrogant. Interested, but not desperate. Every word you say has been filtered 3 times before leaving your mouth. This isn't connection. This is negotiation. Your date asks about your last relationship. Truth? It ended badly. You were a mess for months. You still think about them sometimes. But watch what your ego does with that truth. It just wasn't the right fit. We wanted different things, but I learned a lot. Sanitized, safe, ego approved. You just lied, but somehow it doesn't feel like lying. It feels like survival. Now fast forward 6 months. You're comfortable together. Your ego relaxes slightly. Let some truth slip through. You argue about small things. She sees you at your worst. He notices your bad habits. And suddenly that perfect version you presented, it's cracking. Your id starts showing up. Jealousy, neediness, anger. Your superego panics. Be better. Don't ruin this. Your ego is exhausted trying to hold both back. Here's what Freud knew that most people deny. Every relationship is actually 6 people in conversation. Your id, ego, and superego talking to their id, ego, and superego. When you fight with your partner, it's rarely about the dishes or being late. It's about which part of your psyche is clashing with which part of theirs. Your id wants attention now. Their superego says they should finish work first. Your ego feels rejected. Their ego feels pressured. Nobody says this out loud. The deepest intimacy happens when egos lower their guard. When you cry in front of someone. When you admit fear. When you're sick and helpless. These moments terrify ego because it loses control of the performance. But they're also when real connection happens. Because for once, you're not negotiating. You're just being. But most people never get there. Their egos are too strong, too protective, too afraid of vulnerability. So they stay in surface-level connections, wearing masks even in bed, performing even when they're alone together. And they wonder why they feel lonely in relationships.
It's 2 a.m. You can't sleep. Your mind is racing with a decision you have to make tomorrow. Should you quit your job? Your id is screaming, yes, do it, you hate it there. Your superego is panicking, no, you need stability, what will people think? And your ego? It's stuck in the middle, exhausted, trying to find a compromise that satisfies neither but keeps you functional. This is where ego shows its weakness. It's not all-powerful. It's just a mediator, and sometimes the forces it's mediating are too strong. Your id doesn't care about consequences. Your superego doesn't care about happiness. They're pulling you in opposite directions, and your ego is the rope in this psychological tug-of-war. Eventually, something has to snap. Watch what happens during a panic attack. Your ego completely loses grip. All its careful controls collapse. Your id's fears flood in without filter. Your superego's judgments attack without mercy. And you're there, hyperventilating, feeling like you're dying because the referee just left the game. Your ego couldn't hold the center anymore. This is what Freud called ego weakness, and everyone experiences it eventually. Or consider addiction. Someone knows smoking will kill them. Their superego repeats this constantly. But their id wants the relief, the pleasure, the escape right now. The ego tries to compromise. Just one more, then I'll quit. But that compromise fails every single time. Because when id and superego are both this strong, ego doesn't mediate. It surrenders. It picks a side or gets crushed between them. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of your bad decisions aren't because you're stupid or weak. They're because your ego made a calculation. It decided that satisfying your id now was worth facing your superego's guilt later. Or it decided that pleasing your superego standards was worth suppressing your id's genuine needs. Either way, you're not really deciding. Your ego is, and it's making deals with parts of you that you don't even consciously know. Freud believed mental health wasn't about eliminating conflict. It was about strengthening ego enough to manage it. But what if your ego gets too strong? What if it becomes so good at mediating that you lose touch with both your desires and your values? Then you're just a negotiator with no stake in the outcome. You're functional but empty. Your ego has weapons, not physical ones, but psychological shields it deploys the moment reality becomes too threatening. Freud called these defense mechanisms, and you use them every single day without realizing it. They're automatic, invisible, and incredibly powerful. Denial comes first. Your partner is clearly losing interest. Everyone sees it, but your ego simply refuses to acknowledge the evidence. Everything's fine, you tell yourself, ignoring the cold shoulder, the short replies, the distance. This isn't stupidity, it's ego protecting you from a truth you're not ready to handle. Then there's rationalization.
You didn't get the promotion. Your id is furious, wants to rage. Your superego says you should have worked harder. Your ego steps in with a story. I didn't really want it anyway. Too much responsibility. I'm better off here. Within minutes, you actually believe this. You've rewritten reality into something bearable. Projection is darker. You're attracted to someone who isn't your partner. That's your id talking, and it terrifies your superego. So your ego does something clever. It projects that attraction onto your partner. Suddenly, you're convinced they're the one being unfaithful. You're suspicious, jealous, accusing. You've taken your own unacceptable desire and placed it in someone else. Watch displacement in action. Your boss humiliates you in a meeting. Your id wants to scream at him. Your superego says you'll be fired if you do. So your ego redirects that rage. You go home and snap at your kids. You kick the dog. You slam doors. The anger is real, but ego has changed its target to something safer. Sublimation is ego at its most creative. You're angry, frustrated, full of aggressive energy. Instead of violence, your ego channels it into boxing, painting, writing, building something. The raw id energy gets transformed into something socially acceptable. This is why artists create best when they're suffering. Here's what Freud understood. These mechanisms aren't bad. They're necessary. Without them, you'd be overwhelmed by reality every single day. The problem is when these defenses become permanent, when reality can't reach you anymore. Your ego wasn't always there. You were born as pure id, a screaming bundle of needs and wants. Hungry? Scream. Uncomfortable? Scream. There was no filter, no consideration, no performance, just raw demand. That baby version of you was completely authentic and completely impossible to live with. Then something happened. Reality hit. Your parents didn't respond immediately every time. You cried, and sometimes nothing happened. Your id wanted the breast or bottle now, but now didn't come. That delay, that frustration, that first encounter with "you can't always get what you want" is when your ego began forming. Freud called this the reality principle overriding the pleasure principle. Between ages 2 and 5, your ego crystallized. This is when you learn to wait, to negotiate, to perform. You figured out that certain behaviors got you what you wanted. Smile and adults give attention. Cry too much and they get angry. Say please and thank you, get rewarded. Throw tantrums, get punished. Your ego was learning the rules of the game. But here's the critical part. Your ego formed based on your specific childhood. If your parents were critical, your ego learned to be defensive, always justifying, always explaining. If they were absent, your ego learned to be independent but unable to ask for help. If they were controlling, your ego learned to be either rebellious or submissive. The ego you have right now is still operating on rules it learned when you were 4 years old. Think about your automatic responses in conflict. When someone criticizes you, what happens? Do you immediately defend yourself? That's your childhood ego, remembering when criticism meant punishment. Do you shut down and go silent? That's your ego remembering when speaking up made things worse. These aren't choices you're making now. They're reflexes your ego developed decades ago. Freud believed you could never fully escape this. Your ego's foundation was laid in childhood, and everything built on top still rests on that original structure. That's why therapy often goes back to childhood, because that's when your ego learned its first and most permanent lessons.
There comes a moment in everyone's life when ego can't hold anymore. Maybe it's a breakup, a death, a failure so complete that no defense mechanism works. Your carefully constructed performance collapses. The mask doesn't just slip, it shatters. And what's underneath terrifies you because you've spent years avoiding looking at it. This is ego death, and it feels like actual death. Your sense of who you are, the story you've told yourself, the version you've presented to the world, all of it dissolves. People describe it as losing their mind, but really they're losing their ego's grip on reality. The id and superego, no longer mediated, crash into each other with full force. Some people reach this through crisis, job loss, divorce, trauma. Others get there through substances that temporarily dissolve ego's boundaries. A few arrive there through meditation or extreme stress. But the destination is the same, a place where ego can no longer maintain its performance.
And here's what's strange. Some people report this as the most liberating experience of their lives. Freud saw these breakdowns as pathological, signs of ego weakness that needed strengthening. But maybe he was partly wrong. Maybe some ego deaths are necessary. Maybe you need to fall apart to find out what you actually are when all the layers are stripped away. The problem isn't the crisis itself, it's what happens next. Most people, once ego reassembles, build the same structure again. Same defenses, same masks, same performances, just slightly modified. They learn nothing from the breakdown except to fear it. They strengthen their ego not to be more authentic, but to prevent another collapse. But some people rebuild differently. They come back with a weaker ego in the best way, less defended, more honest, more willing to let reality in even when it hurts. They stop trying to control everything. They accept that ego is just a tool, not their identity. These people look different after crisis. Calmer, sadder maybe, but more real. They've seen behind their own mask and decided they don't need to wear it so tightly anymore.
So now you know, your ego isn't you. It's a mediator, a performer, a mask maker that's been running your life since childhood. The question is, what do you do with this knowledge? Because you can't just delete your ego. You need it. Without it, you'd be either an impulsive animal or a guilt-ridden statue. Ego is what makes you functional. But here's the uncomfortable truth Freud left us with. You'll never be completely authentic. That raw, pure, unfiltered version of yourself that you think is the real you, it can't exist in society. The moment you interact with another human being, ego activates, because total honesty would destroy every relationship you have. Imagine saying exactly what you think, doing exactly what you want. You'd be unemployed, alone, and probably arrested within a week. So the goal isn't to eliminate ego, it's to become aware of it, to catch yourself mid-performance and ask, who am I performing for right now? What am I protecting? What am I afraid will happen if I stop? Sometimes the performance is necessary. Sometimes it's just habit. Learning to tell the difference is the work of a lifetime. Start small. Notice when your voice changes. When you're with your boss versus your best friend, the pitch actually shifts. That's ego adjusting. Notice when you lie, even tiny lies, social lies, polite lies. Each one is ego choosing safety over truth. Notice when you feel one thing but say another. That gap between feeling and expression, that's ego at work. Freud believed self-knowledge was painful but necessary. The more you understand your ego's patterns, the less they control you. You'll still use defense mechanisms, but you'll see them happening. You'll still wear masks, but you'll know when you're wearing them. You'll still perform, but you'll choose your performances more consciously. Here's what nobody tells you. Getting to know your ego means getting to know your darkness. Your ego exists because underneath it, your id has desires you find unacceptable, and your superego has standards you can never meet. Looking at ego means looking at both. But there's freedom in this. Once you stop pretending ego is you, you can work with it instead of being controlled by it. You become the director of your own performance instead of an actor who forgot their acting. And maybe, with people you truly trust, you'll risk lowering the mask entirely. Not forever, not with everyone, but in moments. And those moments of genuine connection, where ego steps aside and lets you be seen, those are the moments you'll remember when everything else fades. Freud gave us the map. Your ego is the territory. Now you get to explore it.